Welcome back everyone. Let's go ahead and take a look at the Google Pixel 4 XL and see how this phone holds up in 2022. Now what I'll definitely tell you about this specific device is that it is a very interesting phone. And back in 2019, Google actually sent me this phone, which I was very happy about. And I'll be honest, I've already rebought like 3 of these, which is very interesting. I do a lot of comparisons, different things like that. And the thing about the Google Pixel 4 XL was that it could have been such an amazing device, but there were a couple of weird things here and there. But I do think as a whole, it's one of those phones that I look back at and I'm kind of cool with it, but at the same time, I'm not really cool with it. Like, it's a really hit or miss type of device in a ton of different areas. Now, if you want to pick up this phone or some other phones I recommend this year, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the outside of the Pixel 4 XL, we have a pretty good 6.3-inch POLED display. It's a 1440p panel and it's a 90Hz panel. Now, back in 2019, this was a really decent panel in my opinion. There were some phones that had 120Hz. Most phones had 90Hz at that time. And to give you some perspective, this was the same year the iPhone 11s came out, the OnePlus 7 Pro came out, and the Samsung Galaxy S10, S10e, and S10 Plus came out as well. So this panel had some decent competition, especially with that Galaxy S10 Plus, and this was a good panel. It did have an edge with that 90Hz. A lot of phones across the board also had a 90Hz and even 120Hz as well, but this was a really decent panel. It had a little bit of a bezel up top, but it really wasn't anything crazy, and I got pretty used to it. Like, that was definitely not a bad looking phone on the front. Weirdly enough though, it also had a pretty premium feeling chassis around it too, which I was totally cool about. You know, I like that kind of stuff, and this specific phone felt pretty premium in the hand. And funny enough, I totally forgot about this, but the back of this phone also had a different type of texture. So it was apparently a glass back, but it was, I guess, the most different glass back I've ever felt in my life, and it honestly felt really nice. Since then, I don't think many phones have used this type of glass back. It's kind of like this glass back, rubbery technology. I don't know what it is. Maybe I'm overhyping it, but it felt really good, and I was definitely a fan of that. If any of you ever owned a Pixel 4 XL, you kind of know what I'm talking about. So this one felt really good in the hand. You had IP certification, you had wireless charging as well. So things like that would typically keep this phone in a really good caliber. I think a lot of people would look at this phone and be like, oh, it's such a perfect phone. How could you hate on it? Well, there were 2 things that stood out to me immediately that kind of didn't make me super happy about it. One, there were only 2 different storage models, and the max storage model was 128 gigabytes. Even at that moment, for a flagship, this was their flagship. It wasn't like their base model. This was the flagship, the XL, that top tier model, the Pro model, and it only tapped out at 128 gigabytes of storage. That's like how the base models of most phones are nowadays, and this one tapped out at there, which was kind of an inconvenience. On top of that, you really only had a dual camera setup, which was good, but it didn't have an ultra-wide sensor, and Google made some comments at this time basically stating, who needs an ultra-wide sensor, we need a telephoto lens, something like that. We don't even remember too much anymore. But that was another thing that kind of threw me off, and nowadays Google has completely, went away from the statement. We pretty much, with the next generation, got an ultra-wide sensor, which is really nice, but I feel like at this moment, Google had a choice. Google was known for their cameras. That was one of the best things about these phones, the Pixel lineup, and this thing had that dual camera setup, that 12.2 megapixel wide angle lens, then a 16 megapixel telephoto lens. On the front, it had an 8 megapixel sensor. Now, we can kind of rewind back and think to ourselves nowadays, oh, it's a 3-year-old phone, so it's not going to have the best camera. But this phone lineup was known for its camera. So for it already lacking that specific camera lens, and it only being able to shoot 4K at 30 on the back and 1080p on the front, was actually pretty embarrassing for a phone lineup that was known for its, camera. And it wasn't a cheap phone. It's not like how the Pixel 6 was now. This was like their flagship phone, which was very weird. On top of that, when you look at other phones in the market, the Galaxy S10 already could do 4K at 60 on the front and the back earlier on that year. This one came out in October. This was past the iPhone 11s even, and even the iPhone 11 could shoot 4K at 60. This camera nowadays really isn't too good, and I think most people probably know that by now. I'm definitely in the market, I'm definitely in the phase where I'm like, yeah, the Pixel 4 XL definitely could have probably been a little bit better in the camera department. It's not an ugly phone, it's definitely not a bad camera nowadays, but I feel like this is one of the weirder aspects of this phone. The camera department, which used to be amazing on the Pixels, Google dropped the ball with this lineup. They fixed it with the next lineup, and they've kind of gotten a little bit better with the Pixel 6 and 6 Pro, but they still have a little bit more room for it to improve, in my opinion, on the camera department for them to be like that camera flagship at that time. So in terms of that covers it up in the camera standpoint. Now in terms of the overall software, this is still a really good thing about this phone. This thing's going to be getting software support for the next couple of years, and even after that it's going to get security updates. And a really good thing with something like the Google Pixel 4 XL is that there's a big, community behind it for the ROM category. So if you want to go ahead and custom ROM this thing, well, you do have kind of a long supported phone there, which is really, really nice. So in that standpoint alone, you're also getting a pretty decent supported phone too. So in the software standpoint, huge thumbs up for me. It's definitely not a perfect phone like I mentioned, but it has a great software lifespan ahead of it. And even after it, being officially supported and all that stuff, it's still going to have a little bit of support there via custom ROM, which is really, really nice. So in terms of that covers it up there. Now to move on to the performance segment, this device does have that Qualcomm Snapdragon 855 chipset inside of it. It has the, Adreno 640 GPU, and it has two different models. Both have 6GB of RAM. And like I mentioned, for this type of phone, I mean, it's not a bad performing phone. It's actually still pretty fast. Now, I will definitely tell you, if you want the best performing phone, I would definitely go for something like the Galaxy S22s, the Pixel 6 Pros, maybe the iPhone 13 Pros as well. But this phone's performance is still pretty smooth and it's still pretty fast. The biggest things about these phones is that you're pretty much still getting a very, very, stock phone. There's not a lot of processing power in the background just to handle this software. There's a lot of phones out there that are pretty much in that category. Fortunately for you, that is not really going to be the case here. So because of that, you're in a good situation where a phone like this is going to be supported for quite a bit of time, and the performance of this phone is still pretty good. Again, it's not quite perfect, but I think it gets the job done for a lot of people. And again, if you're somebody who just wants to go get a phone and have a decent performing phone at that, well, this is definitely an option for you, and I would probably recommend you to pick up this phone, but it wouldn't be the first phone I'd recommend in terms of performance. It's a couple years old now. We've gotten humongous improvements in the performance segment from all of these Snapdragon processors, so that's another thing to keep in mind. I don't think it's the end of the world, but it is one of those things to keep in mind at the back of the day. So in terms of that covers it up there. Now in terms of battery life, this is another weird segment about this device. 3700 mAh battery inside of it. It was, I think, a good battery size at that time, but again, compared to nowadays, a lot of phones are having much bigger size batteries. So if you're planning on buying this phone, do keep in mind that a phone like this has already kind of degraded in the battery health department. So I think that's another big thing to keep in mind. On top of that, with a phone like this, you're really not going to be getting the longest lasting supported battery life of all time either, because you do have bigger size batteries with the newest generations. The battery health of this phone has only gotten lower since even buying it, and I've bought a few used ones, and those ones, I'm pretty sure the battery has degraded a little bit too, which is very interesting because it wasn't even that old of a phone at that moment, but it is what it is. I'll definitely tell you when it comes down to the battery, it's not good, it's not amazing, but it's not bad either, so it's very, very average for the price and the size of this phone. So to kind of be completely honest, the Google Pixel 4 XL sits at a very interesting spot. I don't necessarily think it's a waste of money, and I don't think it's like the best bang for your dollar. I think a phone like the Pixel 5 would probably be the one I'd recommend the most. Even though it doesn't strike me as a flagship as much as the Pixel 4 XL, I think the Pixel 5 kind of fixed a lot of things that the Pixel 4 XL kind of gave me troubles with. And I think that's the one area where I keep looking at the Pixel 4 XL and I just kind of get weirded out with the storage models, with the lack of ultra-wide sensor, with it being a little bit older now, and with how expensive this phone was at the time. I feel like Google could have done a better job, and I actually do think they've been improving with the next couple generations. So I guess we'll see what happens in the future, but that's kind of how I look at the Pixel 4 XL as of right now. If you have any other questions or anything, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.